I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Sleep is important for good health. It's especially helpful for a strong immune system. How can you get the sleep you need? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
The pandemic has thrown a lot of our rhythms and routines off kilter. Many people report that they're too worried to sleep well. What can you do to get to sleep and stay asleep, even in anxious times?
What about sleeping pills? Are there any concerns about over-the-counter PM pain relievers?
Children are not immune to insomnia or other sleep disturbances. How can parents help them?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, sleeping better during the pandemic.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, a new study suggests that the number of people who have contracted COVID-19 could be much higher than the official case counts. The Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center has reported more than 106 million people have contracted the virus globally. 27 million of them are in the U.S. But researchers at the University of Texas Southwestern think that the number could be up to 3 times higher. A model they developed with the help of a machine learning algorithm estimates that more than 71 million Americans had been infected as of early February. To make this calculation, the algorithm counts the number of deaths and estimates based on an infection fatality rate of 0.66%. To check the accuracy of the algorithm, the researchers used blood tests that show how many individuals in an area have been exposed to the coronavirus. The calculations track closely to the percentage of people with positive antibodies. The algorithm estimates higher infection rates for other countries as well. In some cases, the number of actual cases is more than 5 times higher than the official count.
People with dementia appear to be more likely to die from COVID-19. The investigators reviewed electronic medical records from 62 million American adults from February through August of 2020. Analysis of the data showed that people with dementia were twice as likely to catch COVID-19 as people of similar age without cognitive impairment. That's after adjusting for risk factors like living in a nursing home or pre-existing conditions. One reason for the disparity could be the dependence on others to wear masks and follow appropriate precautions. The authors conclude that people with dementia need caregivers to protect them from infection.
Is it any wonder that Americans are confused about eggs? A meta-analysis published last month in the American Journal of Medicine concluded that eggs are not linked to cardiovascular disease. In fact, the authors report that people who eat more than 1 egg a day are less likely to have coronary artery disease than those who eat fewer. Now, a study published in PLOS Medicine turns this conclusion on its head. The researchers analyzed data from more than 500,000 American volunteers between 50 and 71 years of age. They were followed from 1995 to 2011. During this time, 129,000 people died. People who ate eggs were more likely to die from cancer, cardiovascular disease, or for any other reason. Although statistically significant, the increased risk was small. Dr. Walter Willett, professor of epidemiology and nutrition at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health at Harvard University, points out that people provided information about their diet only once at the beginning of the study. Assuming that egg consumption remained static throughout the study may have been misleading.
For years, cardiologists have warned heart patients about coffee. They were concerned that caffeine would raise blood pressure and cause palpitations, but a new study in the journal Circulation, Heart Failure, has just produced some intriguing results. The researchers analyzed data from 3 large, long-lasting cohort studies of heart health. Over 21,000 patients were tracked for a minimum of 10 years. People who drank at least 2 cups of caffeinated coffee daily were less likely to develop heart failure. This is a condition in which the heart has trouble pumping blood efficiently. Previous studies have found similar associations. Both Swedish and Finnish researchers have found that people drinking about 4 cups of coffee daily had the lowest risk of heart failure. The Scandinavian coffee cups are smaller than American cups, however. An accompanying editorial points out that these studies cannot establish a cause and effect relationship between drinking coffee and protection from heart failure. On the other hand, black coffee is entirely plant-based and contains polyphenols with antioxidant and detoxifying activity. It may be premature to recommend that people consume coffee, but those who do enjoy a cup or two should not feel guilty. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. How are you sleeping these days? We're told that getting a good night's sleep is critical for a robust immune system. And yet many of us have been having a hard time sleeping, in part because of anxiety about the pandemic. What can we do to overcome insomnia?
We're talking today with Dr. Charlene Gamaldo. She is a professor of neurology and the medical director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Sleep and Wellness.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Charlene Gamaldo.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Gamaldo, these are really tough times. COVID-19 has everyone pretty freaked out, and I suspect it's affecting their sleep. What are you hearing from your patients?
Oh, absolutely. We've certainly seen that, so much so that within the sleep world, we have coined it COVID-somnia. And that is likely related to not just how our world has been turned upside down as a result of our lifestyle and being more, locked in at home. That affects our sleep, but also for folks who may have actually experienced COVID itself and experienced some of the long hauler symptoms for which sleep has now been added to the list.
Yikes. I hadn't heard about that. So in addition to the loss of smell, loss of taste, some of the cardiac problems, you're saying that insomnia is another complication?
Correct. That's what has now been also observed and added to the list. So similar to what we've seen with other post-viral syndromes where chronic fatigue, muscle aches, fuzzy-headedness, but sleep can also be an issue. And it's certainly been the case in this post-viral syndrome of COVID, that people will experience more problems with the ability to fall asleep, stay asleep, and feel rested upon waking.
Well, Dr. Gamaldo, plenty of people who have not actually been infected with COVID-19 also are having troubles falling asleep, staying asleep, and feeling rested. Is that also something that you and your colleagues are seeing?
Absolutely. So that's the intro part of what I was saying, that it's for folks who have both experienced COVID or been infected, but also for all of us who've experienced a complete overhaul in our life because of COVID. So our sleep is very much a product of not just our inherent ability to be a good or bad sleeper that's within our genes, but also the environmental factors. So that's where the pandemic, in terms of the lockdowns and everything, has affected our sleep as well.
What kinds of effects does lack of sleep have on our health in general?
Oh, many things. So now we sort of see sleep. People who sleep well have better health. but people with better health or have the ability to be good sleepers. So we know that, if you're in pain, if you're depressed, if you're stressed out, if you have breathing issues, that can affect your ability to sleep well at night. But at the same turn, if you have problems with being a good sleeper, so if you have insomnia, if you have things like sleep apnea, that put you at higher risk for having other medical conditions down the line. So this can include diabetes. This can include certain rheumatological problems like pain due to osteoarthritis. This can affect certain pulmonary diseases such as asthma, and the list goes on, including cardiac disease and stroke.
I'm suspecting that a lot of people are relying on their electronic devices these days. I mean, everybody's doing Zoom. We're interviewing you from our quote unquote home studio. So the electronic devices, whether it's our phones, our smartphones, whether it's our tablets, whether it's our computers, we're checking email constantly. We're texting our friends. And I bet that has an impact on our sleep, especially if we do it before going to bed.
You got it. So these are the elements of how our lifestyle has changed as a result of the pandemic that has directly impacted our ability to be good sleepers from an environmental standpoint. So we're spending more time in front of our computers doing Zoom during the workday. So 7 to 8 hours, just Zoom, back to back meetings. And then it's followed up by us tethered to the TV, our electronics for our entertainment at night, whether it's Netflix binging or binging on the news to see what's going on in the world. And all of that is the electronics and the blue light that comes from those electronics actually affects our ability to get good sleep at night. And this is the result of, a hormone in our brain called melatonin that helps to set the stage for us to go to sleep at night as much as 4 to 6 hours before we actually feel sleepy. Melatonin is released in our brain to set the stage. But guess what? Those blue lights that's emitted from all of these electronics, it actually inhibits our brain's ability to respond to melatonin.
Now, Dr. Grimaldo, in the past, we have heard people recommend good sleep hygiene, which involves, among other things, turning your devices off at least an hour before you plan to go to bed. Can you tell us it's kind of a strange term, sleep hygiene. What does it mean, and does it make sense?
So it certainly does. I mean, I think it's analogous to, when we think of dental hygiene, right? We are to make sure that we minimize the sugar bugs and cavities. The best way to do that is to think about, brushing twice a day, flossing daily, doing those sorts of things. And sleep hygiene is sort of analogous to that. So there are things that we can do in terms of our behavior, in terms of our environment that prime us to be the best sleepers that we can be. And of those, one that we mentioned is, of course, minimizing the screen time and electronic devices, because what that does is that inhibits our body's ability, once again, to absorb the melatonin that's released in our brain for us to set the stage for sleep. Another critical sleep hygiene issue is actually activity that we do during the day. So the more active we are during the day, the more primed we are for our bodies to say, okay, it's time to relax, restore, and repeat, so that we're ready to start our day the next day. So it makes us more primed to go to sleep. So physical activity, it is important, but also social activity and feeling socially engaged. So this is where COVID-19, in terms of the lockdown and feeling isolated, can be a triple whammy. Okay, in terms of people not being physically active, walking to work, walking from their garage, feeling like they can go outside, but also in terms of feeling socially active and socially engaged. So if people don't really prioritize connecting with family and friends, even if it's via Zoom or via telephone calls, all of that impacts our ability to be a good sleeper.
Dr. Gamaldo, I suspect a lot of people are waking up in the middle of the night with nightmares. I know I have really vivid dreams. Is there anything that we can do to either prevent them or, if they occur, not keep us awake for hours after we wake up?
Sure. So a couple of things to think about. One is, if this is occurring as something that's new, and what else is going on surrounding those nightmares? So if a bed partner or yourself has noticed that there's nightmares, but there's also more snoring, more kicking, more restlessness, more breathing issues, the nightmares could actually be, the recognition of those nightmares could actually be because you're waking up in the middle of the night because of sleep apnea. So that's certainly things that could be disrupting the continuity of your sleep definitely needs to be evaluated. And that nightmare could actually be a very good sign for you to be able to explore that and have that evaluated.
Well, let me interrupt you right there because we have a question from Virginia. She says, I had violent nightmares triggered by sleep apnea. My doctor never suggested a sleep test because I'm atypical. I'm thin. I don't have a thick neck. I don't do shift work. However, my nightmares woke me up because I was oxygen deprived. Nightmares can be caused by more than just anxiety.
That's exactly right. So in this long road of practicing sleep, that people can show up in many forms in terms of how that sleep apnea is uncovered. So anytime I hear of a person saying that they're waking up in the middle of the night, I want to always explore the reasons for that sleep disruption, because something woke them up, and it may not be just the nightmare in and of itself, but something that could be a serious sleep condition. This is particularly so with women. So women are more likely to show up with sleep apnea and it not be overt snoring or gasping or choking that's witnessed, but it could be insomnia, it could be nightmares, it could be even depression. So we have really recognized that you do not want to profile, per se, sleep apnea as just a male who may be overweight and is rattling the windows with snoring. There are plenty of other ways that people can present with sleep apnea, and it doesn't necessarily fit the stereotypical, archetype.
Right.
You're listening to Dr. Charlene Gamaldo. She's a professor of neurology and the medical director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Sleep and Wellness.
Are you able to turn off your electronic devices an hour before bedtime? It's not so easy.
What about you, Joe?
Oh, guilty as charged. I always like to check my email one last time.
Maybe you should follow Dr. Gamaldo's advice.
After the break, we'll learn what sleep apnea is and why it's important.
Sometimes people with sleep apnea can spend the night asleep in bed and still wake up exhausted.
What can you do to treat sleep apnea?
Getting to sleep isn't the only problem we've seen in this pandemic. People may wake up in the middle of the night and have trouble getting back to sleep. Is there anything you can do to get back to sleep when you've been awakened?
Are there over-the-counter sleep aids that can help? Are there some unexpected risks?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia Memory Plus. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia Memory Plus has 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that have been proven to help boost memory.
CocoVia Memory Plus is backed by 4 clinical trials that demonstrate improvement in 3 different aspects of memory: long-term memory, spatial memory, and word recall. The studies show improved brain function in just 8 weeks.
You can try the benefits of CocoVia Memory Plus with a 25% discount off your first month. Use the code PEOPLES25. To get the full benefits, take it daily for 8 weeks. CocoVia is offering People's Pharmacy podcast listeners a 10% discount on subscriptions. That code is PEOPLES10. Learn more at cocovia.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
We're talking about sleeping better during the pandemic.
We know these are anxious times, but are there some strategies that can help you get the sleep you need?
Our guest is Dr. Charlene Gamaldo. She is a professor of neurology and the medical director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Sleep and Wellness.
Dr. Gamaldo, you were just describing sleep apnea, and I wonder if you can tell us what is it, why is it important, and what do we do about it, please?
Absolutely. So sleep apnea is, of course, apnea, which means a Greek term for not breathing or not moving air, and sleep meaning it occurs while you're sleeping. So that is one of the most common sleep disorders that we see in a sleep clinic. It is diagnosed either by having a sleep study in a sleep lab, or even more commonly, it can be diagnosed with devices that you can wear in the comfort of your home and in your natural environment for us to be able to capture that. Why is it important? Is because sleep apnea has been not only linked directly as a cause of death, so it can be now listed on a death certificate, but it's also been directly associated as a primary risk factor for many common medical conditions, chronic debilitating medical conditions. And this can include stroke, heart attack, fatal arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, significant pulmonary disease like COPD, asthma, diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, and again, pain syndromes. It can make experiencing pain a lot more profound if you have sleep apnea.
Now, I'm guessing, Dr. Gamaldo, that a lot of people who have sleep apnea wake up feeling exhausted and really aren't getting decent sleep.
That's correct. So if this is occurring multiple times during the night where you are not moving air while you breathe, the only way your body can respond without, pretty much suffocating and dying in your sleep is actually to wake you up. So that your airway can open up and so that you can have airflow again. This can happen as much as 20 to sometimes 120 times per hour. And this is not always completely conscious to the person experiencing it at the moment. But as you can imagine, if that's happening so much during the night, you never get restful sleep. And this is why people will wake up and say, despite getting 9-10 hours of sleep, I never feel rested. And it's because they can never get consolidated, sleep. And
Dr. Gamaldo, what can people do about sleep apnea?
Sure. So there are many different treatment options, and this can range based on the severity of the sleep apnea and the other medical conditions surrounding the patient. So this is very much in the precision medicine realm and personalized medicine realm. But I'll give you a few buckets of things that can be considered. So for folks who have more of the mild sleep apnea, it can be things like reducing some of the risk factors that can cause your sleep apnea. So for instance, some people, it may be brought on with alcohol close to bedtime. It can be associated to certain medications, or it can be associated to risk factors such as weight. minimizing those can be enough that it can get rid of sleep apnea. If those sort of more conservative methods are not enough, there are more aggressive interventions. This can range from doing an oral or a dental mouthpiece device that helps to keep the airway open. That is one option for mild or moderate. There are breathing apparatuses like positive airway pressure. One can be continuous positive airway pressure like CPAP, but they also have more sophisticated devices. But essentially, it's helping to keep the airway open by blowing air into the back of the throat. There are also surgical techniques or interventions that can be done, and that can involve removing tonsils and floppy tissue in the back of the airway. And then it can range from even more sophisticated techniques like implantable devices, stimulating devices to help to stimulate with your nerves, stimulate the back of the throat so that it can keep the airway open during the night. So there are many different options that range from even as simple as a pillow, if you have it primarily on your back, to things more aggressive like these sort of surgical and implantable device techniques.
Dr. Camaldo, there are a couple of primary sleep disturbances beyond sleep apnea. I mean, I think of a lot of people who have a hard time falling asleep. Their mind is running through all of the events of the day. They're concerned about COVID. They're concerned about their job. They're concerned about, all sorts of things. And it's just hard to turn off that conversation. And then there are the people who wake up in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they had to get up to go to the bathroom, and then they have a really hard time getting back to sleep. Can you help them figure out ways to overcome the first problem, falling asleep, and then the second problem, what do you do if you wake up and then you can't fall asleep at 3 a.m?
Yeah, so generally speaking, that would be labeled as an individual who has insomnia. And insomnia, the diagnostic criteria is really the difficulty either getting to sleep within 30 minutes, staying asleep where you wake up and cannot get back to sleep within 30 minutes, and then it's associated the next day, despite getting, ample amount of sleep opportunity of 7 to 8 hours in bed per night, you wake up and you don't feel rested and restored and ready to start your day. Where it becomes complicated is the reasons behind why that is happening. And that's the art of where sleep medicine comes in. That can be because of things in the environment. Like, so if your room is too hot, too cold, it's too loud, things like that. That can affect it. It could be things that are medically going on with you that's making it difficult for you to feel comfortable to go to sleep. Again, it could be pain, discomfort, inherent lung problems that make that difficult. Or it could be, when you rule out all of those other things, what we call primary insomnia. And that's when your brain just doesn't have the ability to access that off switch as efficiently as we like. When you get, we go through that entire list comprehensively with each patient because we have to decide what's probably the most likely factors that are involved. And it could be one or many. When it comes to primary insomnia, after you've dealt with the other extraneous ones, primary insomnia, you want to think about what you can do to help that patient have an environment that's most primed to help them sleep, and then have a mindset or their brain be the most apt to be able to access that off switch. Some of that can be done with measures that we discussed in terms of being more active, physically active during the day. That's going to help your brain be able to do that better. Physically and socially more engaged. There's things also in your bedroom environment that can do it. Followed by that, there are things that you can do to prepare prior to an hour or so before going to sleep that can help with this. And this goes along the lines of some of the cognitive behavioral treatment intervention techniques for insomnia. And that's now considered to be the first line approach to intervention or treatment for insomnia before even considering any medications. So there's about 7 or 8 techniques aside from sleep hygiene to do that, but that's where we would explore first before we would even contemplate medications.
We've heard that a hot shower, or actually a hot bath, maybe an hour before bedtime, can be helpful. Is that something you ever recommend?
Oh, absolutely. The hot shower, hot bath is great. The reason for this is because an hour before with that hot shower, it's going to help to increase your core body temperature. And if you really, really spike that core body temperature, it's followed about within an hour later of a precipitous drop. And it's actually the drop in the body temperature to a cooler, like 60, in that 67, 68 range, that it makes you the most conducive to go to sleep. And so that, along with having your room cool and dark like a cave, having your core body temperature in line with that makes it more conducive to go to sleep.
Any other suggestions about how to turn off that active brain?
Yeah, a few things. You certainly want to turn off electronics and any content on TV that would make the brain be more inclined to be active. So certainly not, the news, not, any action movies or things like that. We've actually recommended, if folks want to watch something in the background, even up to an hour before, you may want to think about like an English period piece, something along those lines, something more of a nature program, something along that has those elements. The other thing that probably helps with that too is we know that certain music or background noise within the spectrum that we call white noise and brown noise can be conducive to helping you transition to sleep. And it can even be conducive to having that on while, for the first hour as you're going to sleep. That can be helpful.
Dr. Gamaldo, I know that a lot of people just want to take something that's going to help them go to sleep. And so they turn to some over-the-counter product. Are there any of those that you ever recommend?
Or that you discourage, because so many of those pain relievers now contain something called diphenhydramine, the ingredient in Benadryl.
Absolutely. So if I was to encourage any over-the-counter, I would turn first to an over-the-counter melatonin. Of course, I would advise patients that it's an herbal medicine, so it's not FDA regulated or approved. However, there are independent entities that, such as USP, that are starting to do a little bit more quality management with that. So I would certainly look for brands that have some sort of a QA independent monitoring.
Is there an appropriate dose of melatonin?
So based on our scientific research, we know that our brain will release about 1 to 2 milligrams into the system to help set the stage for sleep. Typically, it's recommended in the scientific literature for sleep of between 3 and 9 milligrams. However, buyer beware that, again, you want to go with one of the brands that has a little bit more QA USP monitoring, because since it's not regulated by the FDA, there may be great variability in how much of the active ingredient of melatonin is in each pill. I would like to speak on the diphenhydramine, though.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So the diphenhydramine that's often now found in some of the over-the-counter pain medications, I typically will also give the risk profile with my patients on that. A few things to consider is that it is more likely to have some adverse issues with older patients, particularly. And so I usually tell them to take with caution. The reason for this is that diphenhydramine can be associated more with daytime grogginess because it stays in the system for a long time. It also can be associated with more problems with even things like hallucinations, feeling cognitively like you're a little bit off, and feeling actually a little bit wacky with diphenhydramine, and particularly in an older population. So I really tell folks to be a little bit more cautious, particularly if you're, older in taking those medications.
We've read some research suggesting that anticholinergic drugs, which is in fact what diphenhydramine is, they affect that neurotransmitter acetylcholine, may be linked to dementia or cognitive impairment if taken for long periods of time. Any thoughts?
So correct. So diphenhydramine, it's working along the same pathway as the cholinergic, and acetylcholine is one of the critical brain transmitters for thought and cognition. And in fact, that's the exact medication that's used in Alzheimer's to help folks with Alzheimer's to feel like they're regaining some of their cognitive capabilities, is actually trying to replace some of the acetylcholine. So from that standpoint, if diphenhydramine can actually block that, it makes perfect sense scientifically that it's going to block people's ability to think properly. In terms of long-term damage or effects, I don't know if the data has completely borne out to say definitively it has some long-term permanent impact, but definitely short term we've seen it, and short term it makes sense based on what we understand chemically in terms of these neurotransmitters in the brain.
Dr. Grimaldo, what should our listeners take away from our interview today? What can they do to improve their sleep and kind of put some of the problems of daily life in the rearview mirror so they can get a decent night's sleep?
Great question. So they need to prioritize what they're doing during the day as well as during the night leading up to sleep as all elements of being a good sleeper. So during the day, you need to be physically active, prioritize that, socially active and mentally active during the day. As you prepare to go to sleep at night, you need to have a routine for going to sleep. That means setting the environment and the stage so that you it is most conducive to going to sleep. So it's a cool, dark cave. You remove all electronics and content that can be distressing leading up to sleep. You should have some sort of a relaxing routine going into sleep. And finally, as you're transitioning to sleep, you should have positive thoughts going into sleep. So if you want to have a worry diary, you start with that to write down everything that you're worried about. We have a lot to worry about during these times, but then it's followed up by a grateful diary. And those are the things that you're happy and grateful that you have so that you transition to sleep on a positive note.
Wonderful ideas. Dr. Charlene Grimaldo, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Charlene Grimaldo. She's a professor of neurology and the medical director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Sleep and Wellness.
The March issue of Consumer Reports has some suggestions for getting better sleep.
For one thing, you might block out any light coming in your window. Also, dump your mattress if it's worn out. And they suggest keeping your bedroom cool, around 65 degrees. If the bedroom's noisy, consider white noise to help mask distracting sounds.
After the break, find out how COVID-19 affects sleep in kids.
What sorts of sleep problems do they experience?
Has it become more difficult to put sleepy children to bed?
If a youngster needs a snack before bedtime, what's a healthy choice?
Does sleep hygiene matter for kids as much as it does for adults?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This podcast is brought to you by Verrazana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to illness. Online at Verrazana.com. That's Verisana.com/health PEOPLE-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50. That's PEOPLE 50.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a supplement with 750 milligrams of cocoa flavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that help support memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
We're talking about getting better sleep during the pandemic. We turn now to children. They're not immune to insomnia or other sleep disturbances, whether it's due to anxiety or disruption of routine. How can parents help their youngsters sleep better?
Our guest today is Dr. Laura Sterne, an associate professor of pediatrics at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and the director of the Johns Hopkins Pediatric Sleep Center. She's board certified in both pediatric pulmonary medicine and sleep medicine. Her clinical practice is focused on the diagnosis and management of sleep-disordered breathing and sleep problems in children and adolescents.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Laura Sterne.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Dr. Sterne, we've just talked with one of your colleagues, Dr. Charlene Gamaldo, and we were talking about the impact of COVID-19 on adults and how it's taken a toll on their sleeping. And we're wondering if that's also happening to children.
Oh, yes. We have definitely seen the pandemic have an effect on the way children are sleeping these days.
What kinds of problems are you seeing?
Well, one of the things that disrupts all our sleep is the use of electronics. And the pandemic has placed all of us on our computers and our phones too much. And we're seeing that in children. I think you go down those rabbit holes. I'm going to explore this on the internet. You never get off the internet, the computer, the TV. And the electronics are replacing normal, healthy sleep time for a lot of these kids.
Dr. Sterne, how common are sleep disorders in children and babies and adolescents?
Sleep disorders are actually very common in children. It's a very common complaint in pediatricians' offices. Children having difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. And by far, one of the biggest issues we have is children, really all of us, not getting enough sleep. And that's what we are seeing sometimes compounded during this pandemic.
Now, we've heard all kinds of health problems associated with inadequate sleep in adults. What about in kids? What happens when they're not getting enough sleep?
Yeah, I mean, many of the problems that you hear about in adults, we also see in kids. Now, while adults often get very sleepy during the day, kids sometimes get, you've all seen sleepy children, more hyperactive, have behavioral issues, have trouble focusing in school. So they don't always look like sleep-deprived adults.
Does that actually, it kind of rebound and make it harder to put them to bed and have them go to sleep at night?
Sure. I mean, when you think about it, one of the first things that helps people maintain healthy sleep is sort of maintaining a regular schedule. So when you have kids who are, having trouble maybe going to sleep at night and then napping a little bit during the day, or being cranky during the day and not getting the exercise and the outdoor time they need, all that affects their nighttime sleep too. So keeping a regular schedule and then filling your day with engaging activities and outside activities helps you get better sleep. But that's hard to do when you're sleep deprived and not feeling your best.
What about diet? How does what we're eating impact our sleep? And I'm thinking especially, kind of post-dinner snacking. Oh, I'll have a little ice cream. Oh, bring on the chips. What happens, if anything, to children's sleep when they're snacking up to bedtime?
Well, so that's a very interesting question. We actually don't think that you should go to bed hungry. We think that that does disrupt sleep. So we don't have a problem with a light snack before bedtime. You don't want a heavy meal. You don't want to be sort of trying to digest your whole dinner before you go to sleep. But a light snack before bedtime can be healthy and acceptable. I want to bring up one other diet thing, which is caffeine. It is amazing how caffeine is snuck into so many things we drink.
What would be a healthy snack before bedtime?
Well, I think something light and easy to digest, some crackers with some water. We don't want to get into high calorie snacks either, right? We are all fighting the obesity epidemic. And so some fruit, some sips of water, a little bit, anything really, just a healthy light snack would work.
Now, Dr. Sterney, it sounds as though what you're talking about is a little bit similar to what we discussed with Dr. Gamaldo, which is something called sleep hygiene. And we made her explain what that means for adults. Does it matter for kids? And if so, what would be a good sleep hygiene for youngsters?
Oh, it absolutely matters for kids. And we spend a lot of time in clinic talking about sleep hygiene and educating our patients and parents. We've already touched on some of the things that go into good sleep hygiene: maintaining a regular sleep schedule, exposing yourself during the day to light, which helps reset your circadian rhythms and your biological clock, getting exercise during the day, engaging during the day, and then having a cool down period at night away from the electronics. 30 minutes where you read in lower light, where you let your brain relax and turn down. Those are very important parts of sleep hygiene.
Sounds like a perfect opportunity for a bedtime story, which I must say was one of my favorite parts of raising my kids, was the opportunity for me to read them a bedtime story.
Oh, that's really wonderful. I mean, not only is reading a great pre-bed activity, but there is lots of data to show that what that does for children, to encourage that love of reading, to spend that time gaining more appreciation for reading is just an amazing thing. So that's a wonderful bedtime routine.
Dr. Sterney, I suspect that one of the biggest problems parents have to deal with is having a child that doesn't fall asleep easily. So a half hour goes by, an hour goes by, they're still wide awake, they're reading, they're complaining, they're getting up. What do you do about a child who seems to have a quote unquote insomnia problem?
So the first step is always to review sleep hygiene. One of the things I left out in that last list also was the use of electronics, TVs in the room. I think people are surprised at how young children have electronics interfering with their sleep or televisions interfering with their sleep. So the first step is always good sleep hygiene. The second is to look at some of the behaviors at night. So you sort of touched on something. We have children, for example, that get used to falling asleep with their parents sitting in the room or being rocked to sleep, and then they learn that that's the condition they need to fall asleep. And when you try to break that habit or do something different, they have a lot of trouble. So we work with families very regularly to deal with these sort of what we call behavioral sleep problems in children, behavioral insomnia in children. And it is something we spend a lot of time in clinic on and can be dealt with to encourage the whole family to have healthy sleep.
Is this where something like sleep training would come in for very young children?
Yes. And, of course, there's all different views on sleep training. There's many different books parents can buy talking about different ways to do that. But in the end, while each family may choose a different method for training sleep, it is important as children get older to teach them how to go to sleep on their own, comfort themselves on their own, and, again, encourage healthy sleep. One of the things I find really encouraging is if you look at studies of older children, we really struggle with sleep in our teenage children and college age children. And if you look at studies where you teach them about sleep and the importance of sleep to their health, to their learning, to their test scores in college, they will take hold of that. They'll work on their sleep schedules. They'll do things to be very, pro sleep. So the more we teach families about sleep and the importance of sleep and patience, I think the better outcomes we get.
Dr. Sterne, we are a nation of pill takers, and there are lots of commercials on television. There used to be a Luna moth that would come flitting in the window for adults. I don't see those kinds of commercials for children, thank goodness, but I'm just wondering about sleeping pills. I'm concerned that adults might use some of the products that are available over the counter for adults in children, and I wonder what you think about that. But I'm also especially curious about something like melatonin. People think, oh, yeah, that's super safe. I can give that to my kids, but they may not know what the proper dose is. Your thoughts?
So my first thought is always that by far, most sleep problems in children are behavioral. So we always first want to work with families before we think about a medication, whether over the counter or not. There are no approved sleep medications by the FDA for children. So all the moth commercial things, there are no similar approved sleep medications for children. So melatonin is a question we deal with all the time. Melatonin is thought to be safe, but of course we don't have sort of big studies on the use of melatonin in children. Melatonin can be helpful for some children, especially those with neurodevelopmental issues. There's lots of good research on that. I'm not a huge sleep medicine fan, not a huge even really melatonin fan, although I believe it's likely safe. If used, I think it should be used under the supervision of a physician who's also helping families work with the sleep issues going on, and at low doses. I see people come in on these way big doses, and there's no indication that more is better for you here. So
now I do worry about over-the-counter cough and cold remedies because some of them have decongestants in them, and those decongestants and even sometimes the antihistamines can wire a child so that they'll have trouble falling asleep.
Yes, you are correct. I mean, we have a lot. Well, obviously those cough syrups can make you sleepy too, the antihistamine. In some children, there's a paradoxical reaction and they actually do get more wired. You're very correct. And unfortunately, sometimes we see families reaching for those as sleep aids. So my big plea is, that most sleep issues in children can be managed by managing hygiene, some behavioral therapies and interventions, and that medications are rarely needed. And we hope in our sleep clinic, we absolutely hope to avoid them 99% of the time.
How do you help parents who say their children are waking up during the night? Obviously, this disrupts everybody's sleep. And if the child has a hard time going back to sleep, what can a parent do?
Yeah. So there's all different reasons why children wake up at night. Sometimes it's what, we sort of discuss. If your child is used to a certain routine before they go to bed, a parent staying in the room, someone, a drink of water, and then, a big production before you go to sleep. Some children need that every time they wake up. And so the parents have to kind of reenact it every time. So we have to work with the child to learn how to sort of self-comfort, stay in bed, fall back to sleep on their own. We all wake up at night, right? We just don't wake up and yell for our parents. Some children wake up because they have fears, nighttime fears or things like that. And then we have different ways to work with the families and the children on that. So it depends on what the issue is. But again, working with a doctor with experience in sleep, or we have sleep behavioral psychology people who work with us, can really help families.
Dr. Sterne, I understand that you're a pulmonary specialist as well as a pediatrician, sleep specialist. So do kids actually get sleep apnea?
Yes, they absolutely do. So children, just like adults, can develop sleep apnea. It is actually not uncommon in children, maybe 3 to 5% of all children. So they snore just like adults. They have the obstructive apneas just like adults, and it can lead to many of the same complications that you see in adults.
What can you do for it?
So interestingly, for children, the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea for most children is to remove the tonsils and adenoids. And in otherwise healthy kids, that'll take care of sleep apnea in a very great percentage of them. For kids who don't respond to getting their tonsils and adenoids taken out, or maybe are older and don't have big tonsils and adenoids, then we do very similar things that we do for adults. So CPAP. So we follow a very large population of kids that are also on CPAP, just like adults.
Is it okay for kids to sleep in on the weekends? Or is that an indication that they're just not getting enough sleep during the week?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't love it. I've raised 2 boys, and I went through adolescence and the sleeping in on the weekends. And it is true that our children are basically sleep deprived, and there probably is some catch-up sleep that's needed. I think it's fine as long as it's carefully managed, meaning I wouldn't I think it's the later you get into the day, then the harder it's going to be for you to go to sleep at night, and you're just going to keep cycling. And then when you have to wake up early for school, it's going to be difficult. So I do think that some of our, again, teenagers, college-age students, they benefit from short naps. They benefit from a little sleeping in. They need to get adequate sleep, but we have to be careful that it doesn't get crazy, that you're not sleeping 5 hours during the day and then unable to go to bed at night until 2 a.m.
Dr. Laura Sterne, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You've been listening to Dr. Laura Sterne. She's an associate professor of pediatrics at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and the director of the Johns Hopkins Pediatric Sleep Center. She's board certified in both pediatric pulmonary medicine and sleep medicine. Her clinical practice is focused on the diagnosis and management of sleep-disordered breathing and sleep problems in children and adolescents. That is all the time we have. The March issue of Consumer Reports has a cover story titled Sleep Better Now, Fresh Ways to Get a Great Night's Rest. They rate mattresses, pillows, and sheets and offer additional tips for maximizing your sleep environment.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
And by CocoVia, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoflavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy episode, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1246. That number again, 800-732-2334. Online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the website, you'll find a link to the Consumer Reports article on sleep. You can also share your thoughts about today's show. What have you done to try to get the sleep you need during the pandemic? How have your children been sleeping? Share your story in the comments on the post for today's show.
You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website every Monday morning. You might want to share it with a friend.
At our website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.